Hi and welcome to In Focus. I'm Loretta Beniti. We are on the road this week at the Vance Granville Community College as we kick off our 4-week debate series in partnership with the North Carolina Institute for Political Leadership. First, we'd like to thank our debate sponsors for this year's series. That's the Independent Insurance Agents of North Carolina and Americans for Prosperity. This year, we will focus our debates on issues of education and education funding and oversight. Our topic today will be the UNC admissions case. What's next? Before we begin the debate, let's go over the rules. I will direct each question to a specific panelist for a 1-minute answer, after which the other panelists will all have 1 minute to answer also. Then there will be a 2-minute rebuttal period during which I may ask a follow-up on the initial answer if I believe that it's necessary. After the discussion for a question is complete, I will move on to a new question, starting with a new panelist. Let's introduce you to our panelists for this debate. First, Kenny Hsu. He is the president of Color Us United and a board member of the Students for Fair Admissions, the group that filed the lawsuits. Hsu is a published author and a graduate of Davidson College. Next is Irving Joyner. He's a renowned civil rights attorney and a professor at North Carolina Central University. He got his Juris Doctorate from Rutgers University. George Leef with the James G. Martin Center for Academic Renewal. The Martin Center seeks to improve higher education by providing research, commentary, and news to policymakers and the public. He holds a Juris Doctorate from Duke University. And Representative Vernetta Alston. She is worked for the state's former Racial Justice Act, for the Center for Death Penalty Litigation, served on the Durham City Council, and is now a Democratic state representative for Durham County. She is a graduate of NC State University and has her Juris Doctorate from UNC Chapel Hill. I want to thank you all so much for joining us, and with that, we're ready to begin the debate. Mr. Hsu, the question is going to come to you first. I think we should start with a baseline here. You believe that the U.S. Supreme Court made the correct decision in striking down the use of affirmative action college admissions. Why do you believe that this will lead to better outcomes? We have a minute.
Because it gives us the opportunity to restructure our higher education system based on merit. So currently right now we live in a college system that is stacked on privilege, on real privilege, and gives preferences to Black Americans. That's what we have right now. But this decision is the beginning of an awakening, a new awakening for higher education. Instead of Harvard giving legacy set-asides and children of donors set-asides, and then, yes, set-asides for Black Americans, we have the opportunity to say, no, excellence has to be our sole focus, our primary focus, and along the way, we can cultivate Black excellence through other kinds of programs, such as improving the public school system, the trades program, community colleges, 2-year colleges, and a whole host of new innovations that could happen in the higher education system that does not start with discrimination against those who are excluded from those categories.
Okay. Irving, same question will go to you. Baseline, do you believe that this was the right decision by the Supreme Court?
This decision was not a surprise. It was one that was expected, all for the wrong reason. At the outset, I want to say very clearly that there is nothing in this system that gives preferences to African Americans. And anyone who believes that is kind of off base. What we had here was a decision that was determined on a policy basis by the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, who had been waiting for this opportunity to rule that the use of race was unconstitutional. And that is what he did in this decision. And to use race here, it was a very unfortunate choice that Asian Americans were used as the scapegoat to try to undermine a system that works, and in the final analysis, a Supreme Court decision that was not even dependent on the factual basis that was set up for the court to review this decision.
Okay, George, we'll go to you. Same baseline question. Was this the right decision by the U.S. Supreme Court?
Yes, I think the Supreme Court made the right decision. And to explain why, I'm going to read some words from an esteemed jurist of the past. This jurist wrote, "To uphold the argument for race preferential admissions would be to call for the sacrifice of principle for the sake of dubious expediency, and would represent a retreat from the struggle to assure that each man and woman shall be judged based on individual merit alone, a struggle which has only lately achieved success in removing legal barriers to racial equality." Those are the words of Justice Stanley Moss with the California Supreme Court in the Bakke case in 1976 as it came to that court. He would have ruled that the UC Davis Med School's use of racial preferences that kept Alan Bakke out were illegal, and I think he had very good reason for doing so. It was a dubious expediency to say that we're going to prefer some people not based on their own merits because we think groups are entitled to greater representation. I think Justice Moss was right. He was even more right than he would know, could have known, based on the subsequent history of racial preferences as we've experienced them since 1976.
Same question to you, Vernetta. Do you believe that this was the right decision by the Supreme Court?
No, I don't. I think it's we're in a dark kind of day or moment when it comes to the protections that folks in protected classes currently have based on decisions like this and can expect from our courts and our legislative bodies. I think it is far from an awakening. I think, currently in our research universities, Black and Latino students are, steeply underrepresented, something like 80% of our research universities. And, in states where there've already been kind of race-based admission bans, enrollment of Black and Latino students has gone down 40%. So we don't have to speculate about what the outcomes are going to be from this kind of ruling on the numbers, let alone what this kind of predicts for how courts are going to treat, again, protected classes who deserve civil rights protection. So I think it's really problematic.
We're now moving to the 2-minute rebuttal period where I can ask follow-up questions. And Mr. Schumer, I'm going to come to you first because we heard him quote a case from 1976 on this. Do you think that it took the court too long to get to this point?
I think the court took the opportunity that it happened now, and as you knew from Grutter v. Bollinger, I think Justice Sandra Day O'Connor said affirmative action as it currently stands should not last more than 25 years past this date. And Grutter v. Bollinger was decided in 2003. That was the decision that previously upheld racial preferences in higher education, and now it's been 20 years. So it's coming up on that date, and it really needs to go because, Renata, affirmative action as we know it has not worked in higher education. It has not helped Black Americans succeed. We still have, as a percentage of lawyers in this country, only 5% of lawyers are Black. There are fewer Black male doctors right now than there were in 1970. So with all of this spending that we've done, with all of these preferences that we've done in college admissions, and yes, Dr. Joyner, there are preferences. In fact, the Students for Fair Admissions data revealed that Asian students have a 1/7 chance of getting in based on their academic rigor, based on their academic accountability, than a Black student who has the same GPA and SAT score. So yes, there are preferences, they exist, but they haven't helped Black Americans succeed in those high prestige professions.
Renata, do you believe that there have been preferences? Joyner said he didn't think that there were preferences for African Americans. Do you feel like there were?
I think the way race-based admissions has been approached, certainly as I understand it from UNC and from other schools, is in a very reasonable and holistic way. I don't think taking into account something that should be taken into account is a preference. And I want to also say, we were talking obviously about affirmative action, about race-based admissions, and I think to the public, the kind of colloquial understanding of affirmative action is race-based admissions, but I think we all know that there are other types of affirmative action that have certainly been talked about in this conversation since this ruling. And so, you spoke about innovations. I'm curious, is getting rid of legacy admissions, getting rid of, early admissions processes that steeply and disproportionately advantage, white applicants. Are getting rid of those things the kind of innovations we're talking about, or are there other things that we could be doing?
Yeah, and I would like to answer that because
we're actually going to come back to that question.
Okay.
Whenever it's time for us to move on to the next. We will come back to that issue, I promise. Later on, we're going to move on to the next question. That'll go to you first. You're a professor at a historically black university. You served as a legal counsel for the NAACP. Do you believe that this idea that having color blindness in admissions is something that reflects the reality of the country and the world that we live in today?
Well, there's no such thing as color blindness. Wherever you look, you see color, whatever it is. But let's set the record straight. In this case, with respect to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, Asian Americans had the highest admission rate of any applicants to the university. African Americans were the least admitted to the university. But in the opinion from Judge Biggs, she found that there was no use of race in making decisions about who entered the university. And because of that, the Supreme Court engaged in a decision-making process that excluded her findings that race was not a factor in the admission of minorities, and that there was not one instance in which an Asian American had suffered any discrimination at the University of North Carolina in its admissions process.
I want to go to you with that question. This idea of not using race, of color blindness in admissions, is that something that can be done in this day and age?
Yes, it can be done. It should be done. There's no reason at all why we cannot treat each individual on his or her, in this case, we'll talk about academic merits. Why can't we say if a person applies to UNC or Harvard or Duke or any other school, we'll evaluate that individual based on his academic capabilities and his desire to learn, and put aside immutable characteristics that really have nothing to do with either of those things. One thing that we do know, the evidence in the Harvard and UNC cases were quite clear. There were strong preferences for members of certain groups and strong preferences against especially Asians. An Asian with a certain score would almost certainly have not been admitted unless he had been in one of the minority groups that is favored. It's very clear that they were being discriminated against. I think that was bad for those individuals, also bad socially. And one reason why I think it's bad socially is that it has become a crutch for young people in the minority communities. They realize, oh, I have affirmative action at my back. I don't have to excel. That was a striking research finding by Professor John Ogbu of the University of California, sociology professor, when he studied the impact of affirmative action in the Cleveland area back in 2000. He found that it undermined the drive of minority students. Because they said, look, I don't have to work as hard as I possibly could. I think that is a bad outcome for society.
I want to ask you the same question, this idea of color blindness for admissions. Do you think that that's possible in today's world, in a reflective of today's world?
I don't think that there's any need to deviate from a process that, I think reasonably takes into account an applicant's race or ethnicity. I think that not only, maybe perhaps most obviously promotes diversity. I think it, helps to create opportunities that, support, frankly, vulnerable and disadvantaged, historically disadvantaged communities, because, frankly, racism, whether it's overt or implicit, exists. And I think any reasonable measures that an institution puts in place to help account for that and to take into account an applicant's merit should be. And I know I'm running short on time, but I can't divorce this issue from, I think, a larger picture of the direction that I think our courts are going in the treatment of protected classes, as well as our legislative bodies. So I think, we can speak, we can talk in the weeds about the impacts of this decision, which are huge, but I think they need to be brought to a larger context as well.
And I'll ask you the same question, Tammy, as far as colorblindness with admissions. Do you see that as a possibility?
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously sympathetic to all the forms of prejudice that exist in the world. I certainly believe that racism exists in the world, including racism against Asians. The UNC admissions process and the Harvard admission process amounts to racism against Asians. If you look at the admitted statistics, and this is something that I've memorized, the average admitted SAT of an Asian student is 1280, and the average admitted SAT of a black student is 1080. So it amounts to a 200-point admitted student penalty. And you can look it up. Don't quote me on this. You can look it up. So that is racism against Asians. I want to stop racism. I want to stop all prejudice. I want admissions to be merit-based. And I think that all colorblindness means in this context is we're not going to look at your race when we use your admitted profile. We're going to evaluate you on your merits, on your GPA, on your SAT scores, on your personal essay.
Rather than do the 2-minute rebuttal, I'm going to actually move into the next question because it follows what we've been talking about. A lot of this case centered around whether or not UNC was considering a person holistically or weighting heavily certain things like race. There were never quotas that were instituted at any place like UNC or Harvard, but do you feel like some students were overlooked merely because of their race, specifically white students?
Yes, just like Alan Bakke was. Numerous applicants to Harvard and UNC and other schools have had to settle for schools that were not their first choice or second choice or third choice or 10th choice because they were of the wrong race. And many of these schools, if they don't have what they call a quota, they seem to operate as if they say, look, we just don't want to have too many Asians on campus. It wouldn't look good for us to have too many Asians. So we'll make sure that we keep down their numbers. It's very much the way Harvard used to do with Jewish applicants. We don't want too many Jewish applicants. It wouldn't be good for us. So they kept down the numbers, even though they were excellent students. And they went to other schools and they prospered. They did very well. A lot of the Jewish applicants who couldn't get into Harvard went to CUNY, got their law degrees, and beat the stuffings out of people who went to Harvard Law School. Degrees are not your destiny. We should not think that going to a so-called prestige school means you will necessarily be successful in life, nor that if you go to a less prestigious school, you will learn less and not be a success. Success in America depends upon what you do after you graduate, not the pedigree of your diploma.
Vernetta, I'm going to ask you the same question. Even without quotas, do you believe with affirmative action that therefore other students have been overlooked?
Yeah, I want to say this. I don't think that diversity or the pursuit of diversity is a zero-sum proposition, and I don't advocate racism for anyone or against any class of people, and so I think we share that as a goal. I think I want the process, whether it's university admissions or any process, frankly, to be fair, and I think that's what we're all trying to achieve. And ultimately, the thought I had earlier is, one of the bigger issues that comes to mind is just the kind of erosion of institutional deference. And I think we see this with admissions, we're seeing this with curriculums, we're seeing this with hiring and firing practices and training tools that universities are allowed to use. And so I see this as part and parcel of the same kind of rollback of control that the institutions, folks who have expertise, who know what their communities look like and what they need, can exercise. And I think that's deeply problematic.
Obviously, you have talked already about the difference in test scores that you have seen, but do you feel like even with quotas not being instituted, that students have been overlooked by some universities? based on their race?
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that some students who are qualified have been overlooked by the university system, and that's why the Students for Fair Admissions versus UNC decision gives us the opportunity to actually reshape the university system. And I highly agree on that. One of the things that the case revealed and the data revealed is not just the preferences for certain minorities, but also the preferences for legacy students, the preferences for children of rich donors. If you were at Harvard, you would have had a 5 times likelier chance of getting in just because of your legacy status. That's wrong. That's wrong. Admissions should be based on merit. And I think that's better for all Americans. It is better when people have a chance to compete on their merits, to compete, to actually strive for excellence, so that we all know that the standard is not lowered for or against anybody, but that we can compete at a fair system.
And same question to you. Do you feel like, even with no quotas, that we were seeing students, white students, Asian students, be overlooked by universities?
Yeah, African American students were overlooked. And African American students have always been overlooked. But I was under the impression that we were talking about UNC figures and not figures from all over the world. Certainly not made up figures. But the data from Judge Biggs, where she entertained all of the evidence from experts for plaintiffs and the defendants, showed that 54% of Asians who applied to University of North Carolina over a 6-year period were admitted. 51% of whites over that same period were admitted. 41% of Hispanics were admitted. 31% of African Americans were admitted. In a state where African Americans represent roughly 21% of the population, Asians represent less than 5% of the population in North Carolina. Now, if they want to present figures from somewhere else, that's fine. My focus is on Judge Biggs' opinion, where she found that race was not a factor in the admission of any student. But if race was a factor in the admission of students, then certainly Asians would fall under that and receive the same plus benefit that people are now arguing against. So they have now conjured up this notion where somehow Asians should be treated like white people rather than being treated as a racial minority that receive a plus factor along with everything else, such that they are the predominant ones in the admissions into the university system.
Well, you used all my exact statistics from a question later that I was using, so I'll do a follow-up with some of these statistics that you use. And Kenny, I'll direct it to you. The statistics that he gave for white students, Hispanic students, Asian and African Americans allowed into UNC, those are the numbers, as well as the fact that we have a black population that's about 25% here in North Carolina. How do you reconcile those numbers when you see those percentage drops?
By breaking it down by academic profile. So we should acknowledge in this country we face stark racial achievement gaps. There's absolutely no question black students tend to score worse on standardized exams than white students and Asian students. That's just the case. And as a result, the black students who are applying to UNC Chapel Hill come from worse academic profiles than the white students and Asian students. This is a given. This is because we have had issues with our public education system, especially for black students, over the past 40 years. So it doesn't come as a surprise to me that they tend to get rejected more in general. Now, I want to improve the academic profile of the black applicants who are actually aspiring to go to UNC Chapel Hill, because I want to help everybody. And what we know is that race preferences in college admissions does not tend to produce the intended effect that you want. Sure, it gets more black students into college, so to speak, but does it actually help to create the environment where they can succeed in the workforce, especially in the top law and business professions in the workforce? That's a dubious proposition.
And George, I wanted to come back to you because we've heard a couple answers during this talk about, okay, we obviously talk about like, the race issues with this UNC case, but even President Joe Biden, after this decision came out, said privilege instead of opportunity when he was talking about legacy admissions. Is the race admissions the only thing that needs to be looked at, or do others?
I'm so glad you asked that. For its entire existence, the Martin Center has stood against all kinds of preferences. We think that legacy preferences should have been ditched a long time ago. And there's very good reason to make that case. When you admit someone simply because his ancestry has a tie to the school, his grandfather went to the school, in hopes, and this is almost always monetary, in hopes that the family will make more donations, you're undermining the academic nature of the institution, trying to maximize your revenue, and at the same time, you're allowing in students who really aren't competitive. And there was a wonderful study done about 15 years ago at Duke by Professor Peter Archidiacono, who took a look at all the preferences at Duke, racial preferences and legacy preferences as well. What he found was that uniformly, the students admitted under those preferences tended to drop out of the demanding majors they had originally selected and would drop into easier majors where they could coast on through and get their degree. So yes, we should get rid of all of these preferences and focus simply on academic merit, academic desire.
I'm going to move on to the next question, Representative Alston. It's going to come to you first. So there's 9 states that already stopped affirmative action in higher education. California dropped affirmative action more than 2 decades ago. There was a big drop in minority enrollment. Then as time passed, less minority students got STEM degrees, undergraduate degrees, or went on to graduate school. Now we're 25 years later. Diversity has actually come up in California at their universities. So should we look at states like California as a cautionary tale or as something to aspire to because they have managed to rebound?
Sure. Well, I think first, when you say diversity is gone up, what's diversity in that statistic? I guess is my first question to clarify. But I think
I will tell you.
Sure.
With my read, I will tell you that they have a much higher number of Hispanic students in California enrolled in their colleges.
I see. Thank you for clarifying. So, I mean, I think it's absolutely a cautionary tale. You know, I think the impact to Black students and Black applicants, that kind of steep decline over that period of time is deeply, deeply troubling. And if you can imagine, if you kind of extrapolate that out to it countrywide, what kind of severe impact that's going to have, not only for the opportunity for individual students and applicants, before the impact, like you said, in fewer graduations, fewer higher graduate degrees, that impact on our economy and the diversity of our workforce, diversity of our companies, over time is going to be devastating.
I'm going to ask you the same question. Statistics show we saw a major drop in California when this happened, but we've seen rebounds now 25 years later. So what lessons could someplace like UNC or other states learn from this?
So I'm familiar with the California situation, and I will tell you, after they passed the affirmative action ban, the racial preferences ban, the percentage of Black students who attended UC Berkeley declined. That's the truth. But the percentage of Black students who attended UC Riverside, UC Santa Cruz, they increased. So they were absorbed by schools. Also, the percentage of Black bachelor degree attainment at UC Berkeley during that time actually stayed the same. It actually went up during 1 year. So even though the only statistic that really dropped was the percentage of Black students at Berkeley, and this goes to my point, right? I believe that we have a chance in the higher education system today. To actually focus on the things that matter. What matters is not whether you get into UC Berkeley. What matters is your K-12 education system good? Does it have good quality teachers? Is there low crime in your neighborhood? Do you come from two-parent family households? Those are some of the core factors that lead to your personal success financially and otherwise in life, and we should be focusing on those things.
Do you look at cases like California and worry that you would see things like that at UNC?
No, I'm not concerned about what happened in California. I'm more concerned about what happens in North Carolina. And in North Carolina, every African American student that is admitted at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill is well qualified and meets all of the standards that's there. UNC uses 40 different factors in determining admissions at that university. Two of whom would be the SAT and the grade point average. There are 38 others that no one here seems to think are important. But I think they are very important, that they are considered. And again, Judge Biggs's decision in this case found that UNC adhered to its policy of admitting people based on the 40-point criteria that went through a 3-tier admissions process where race was not a determining factor for those students who were admitted. All facts that the U.S. Supreme Court failed to even address or look at, and I think they're all very important in making an admission decision.
And I'll ask you the same question. We can look at other states that what happened with race preference. Are there lessons? Are there any cautionary tales for the UNC or Harvard coming out of this?
California is a very revealing case study. After Proposition 209 was passed, as Kenny pointed out, the number of black students admitted to the top schools did go down for a while. Those students, however, they went elsewhere. They went to other schools in the UC system or Cal State's schools where they did fine. In fact, the percentage of black graduates going into science and industry increased. One man who has really studied the impact in California is Professor Richard Sander at the UCLA Law School. His argument is that by admitting students with lesser academic capabilities into the top schools, they're more likely to either drop out of the top majors, as was the case at Duke, or drop out of school altogether. His argument is that you will get more success in the minority communities if they start off at schools where they are a good match competitively for the rest of the student body. That's what they found was the case in California. The real question is not whether these students will go to college, it's where they will start. And after that, they will do fine based upon their own capabilities.
I want to ask one quick rebuttal in this, and I'll ask it of you, Irving. We've heard more than one time this thought that, well, if we're not letting black students in by giving them a boost up with affirmative action, they can just go to another college. Do you worry that, I'll use this term, the elite universities are going to start looking very different with the race that's on these campuses?
Well, clearly the so-called elite universities are reviewing their admissions process. And I don't know how they are going to come out on what it is that they're going to do. But clearly the 40-factor admissions process used at Carolina is one that ought to be emulated. The trial judge found that it was one that was more than adequate to rebut any claim that there was preference being given to African American students. And if there were any preferences given, they were given to Asian students. Now you also have to remember that at Carolina they had over 45,000 applications for 4,500 slots there, of which 2/3 of the applicants came from out of state. Only 18% of those applicants could be admitted anyway. So 1/3 of the students came from North Carolina. And that skewed this process. So these people who are pouting these numbers don't take into consideration the kind of multi-factored admissions process that was present at UNC, as they seem to suggest that just because you're an African American, you are unqualified, or that you are average. There are a number of African American students, a large percentage, that are more than qualified, and the statistics show that. One last point. Julius Chambers, who is a revered African American civil rights worker, had the lowest GPA, LSAT, going into the University of North Carolina Chapel Hill Law School when he was admitted, but graduated at the top of his class, being the editor of Law Review and being the valedictorian of the class. So numbers don't mean a damn thing.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next question. Kenny, I'm going to come to you. We've talked a little bit about the idea of getting rid of any sort of preference towards students as they apply to colleges. But we keep using this word diversity, and I thought it was important for us to discuss this diversity issue. Are there things other than race that should be part of like a 40-factor admissions process in this day and age? Political ideology, religion, things like that. Where do you think we should be drawing the line for colleges?
we all have preferences. There's no question. We all have prejudices. There's no question.
But the scale of the prejudices at UNC is something that I am going to stand firm on, Dr. Joyner, because even though they claim it's a 40-factor process, the end result is a 200-point essay, which is very significant. The SAT is only 1,600 points, guys. A 200-point difference in the average admitted SAT score of Black Americans versus Asian Americans. And I get it. You cite the Biggs decision, which was in the district court, but the Supreme Court overturned the Biggs decision because they found that that whole amalgam of factors, the other 38 factors that we're talking about here, basically amounts in an amalgam to discrimination against Asians. So while I truly agree with a lot of people that just because an admission system isn't perfect doesn't mean we can't use it, I do agree. I do think that UNC's admission system crosses the line.
Okay. I'm going to ask that question of you also. Are there other things that should be factored in when you come to preference? Things like political ideology or religion or that kind of thing?
Well, the Chief Justice Roberts ends his opinion in this case with one paragraph, which said that in the admissions process, it is certainly within the confines of the Equal Protection Clause that an admissions officer considers the struggle that students have faced in overcoming deprivations that they face in their early life. And among those things were the experiences that they had because of their race, because of discrimination, because of oppression that they had faced. And if that presents a picture or an individualized determination that they are competent to deal with the academic rigor, then that is admissible under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, which is exactly what UNC Carolina did with this admissions program, and that's why they had 40 points rather than 2.
You've already said that you don't like any preferences. When you're looking at university admissions processes, he quoted the part of Chief Justice Roberts' opinion that perhaps you could use it in essays or something like that. Do you think that there are things that should be considered? That there's other things that diversify this, other things?
There are other things, yes, absolutely. My concern is that college admissions officials are so wedded to the idea that they must have right quotas, the right numbers. They can't have too many Asians. They have to have the right numbers of other minorities. That they're going to use this as a way to, well, it'll be more than just a little thumb on the scale. It'll be a very heavy weight on the scale in favor of some students who they think they want simply because their ancestry puts them in a certain category. Many of the students who are admitted under these preferences are just average, pretty well-to-do Americans. That was one of the points that Professor Ogbu found in his research. It's also a point that's been made by, among other people, Professor Sharon Cashin, who says that, look, what affirmative action gives us is just optical diversity. Most of the minority students come from well-to-do households. They're no different culturally than the majority of the students on campus. We're not really accomplishing anything as far, if diversity really is an objective educationally, we're not accomplishing it through the methods that we now use. If schools were serious about diversity, they might go and look for students with differing philosophies. They might go and look for some libertarians. They might go and look for Second Amendment advocates. If they really want their schools to be a place where the students can interact and learn from each other, that's what they could look for.
I'll pose the question to you also when we're looking at diversity issues beyond race. Are there other things that in this day and age university should be looking at?
Honestly, I don't know what those things should be. I think those decisions, in terms of what should be considered in a college or university's holistic view of an applicant's application, should be left to the experts at the university to decide, what kind of process, what kind of deep and searching process they undertake, and who's the right fit, who's prepared to be a student at their university. And I do want to quickly, I can't not object to the notion that elite universities aren't good matches for Black students. I think whether or not a Black student is prepared to attend and to achieve attainment at a university, again, is up to our institutions. And they've done so effectively for many, many years. Thank you.
I'm actually going to move on to the next question. It goes to you first. And you've mentioned this more than one time, that there's many studies that show that in standardized testing, that it's racially biased against Black and Latino students, and that they don't do as well on it. It is factored into, standardized testing is factored into many college admissions. So how does this get corrected if we're going to see numbers of differentials on SAT scores, if you're trying to not weight this?
The university has a right and a responsibility to identify the particular mission in which they are engaged and the type of student that they want on their campus to fulfill that mission, or that will allow them to fulfill that mission. At University of North Carolina, they use the review of the rigor of the academic program that the students was engaged in, the academic performance, the standardized test result, extracurricular activities, special talents that they had, the essay presentation, the background of the students, personal attributes of the students, and some 30 more factors that they use. And it is out of that milieu of factors that they can construct the best academic environment that they need for the students that they admit. Every student does not have a right to go to a particular school, but the school has the opportunity and the responsibility of shaping the campus that they are in. African American students traditionally have been undervalued and have been discriminated against. They continue to do so, and here on this stage, there is this argument that that discrimination should continue.